Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. A single, cold percussion against my cheek shattered the stillness. My head snapped up. Above, the heavens were bruising, vast swathes of charcoal cloud consuming the last vestiges of blue. A curse, sharp and low, escaped my lips. This solitary trek meant as a balm for a frayed mind. A communion with silence was unraveling. With the swift ascent of twilight and a plummeting chill, the stark truth struck. The trail, my only thread back, was gone. My phone, drawn with frantic hope from my pocket, offered only mockery. No network. Stark white letters against a dead screen, amplifying the profound isolation tightening around my chest. The rain, no longer tentative, began its insistent drumming, a relentless curtain drawing across the world. To blunder onward through the deepening woods, this ink-washed landscape courted disaster. Shelter. My eyes strained against the murk, seeking any cleft, overhang, anything less hostile than the open air. And then a tremor of light. Distant, wavering through the aqueous screen of rain, yet undeniably present. A campfire, another soul adrift, or fortune smiling improbably, a ranger's outpost. A flicker of hesitation, approaching an unknown fire deep in the wilderness, carried its own risks. But the alternative, a night surrendered to the gnawing cold and soaking rain, was unthinkable. A low rumble of thunder, like a distant beast clearing its throat, settled the matter. I plunged towards the light, branches whipping, the sodden earth sucking at my boots in the encroaching dark. Closer now, the glow resolved not into flickering flames, but the steady, warm radiance of electricity spilling from windows. A structure took shape between the skeletal trees. A cabin, small and solid. A wave of profound relief washed through me, potent as liquor. Surely the occupants would grant refuge from the storm's escalating fury. I stumbled from the tree line into a compact clearing. There it sat, a log dwelling seemingly plucked from folklore, smoke unfurling from its stone chimney like a contented sigh, promising sanctuary. Approaching the threshold, I became acutely aware of my state. Drenched, mud-spattered, festooned with leaf litter. A futile attempt to brush myself down preceded the rap of knuckles against the solid wood door. Silence stretched, thick and expectant. Just as I raised my hand to knock again, a shuffle sounded from within. Footfalls drew near. The door groaned open. The figure framed there wasn't what I'd envisioned. He was old, perhaps past 60, crowned with a tumultuous shock of silver hair and a beard equally untamed. His eyes, however, were startlingly lucid, pale chips of ice that fixed on me with an unnerving intensity, pinning me in place. "Ah, hello," my voice emerged thin and reedy. "Terribly sorry to disturb you. I seem to have lost my way on the trail. Then this tempest blew in. I wondered if I might possibly wait here just until the rain eases." The old man offered no immediate reply, his gaze traveling over me, assessing, weighing. The quiet grew heavy, punctuated only by the storm's percussion. Finally, he spoke, his voice a gravelly rasp, yet lacking malice. "Best come inside," he rumbled, "no sense drowning out there." Gratitude surged as he stepped back, gesturing me into the warmth. The cabin's interior was compact but enveloping, dominated by a substantial stone hearth where flames danced with cheerful vigor. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed tight, every horizontal surface cluttered with an eclectic mix of objects, artifacts, curiosities, things that felt less like possessions and more like unearthed relics. "Thank you, truly," I managed, stepping carefully to avoid trailing water across the worn floorboards. "I appreciate this immensely. My name is Silas." A curt nod was his only acknowledgement. "Corvus," he stated flatly. "Washrooms yonder if you need to dry off. Might find you something less sodden." I nodded, grateful, and ducked into the small bathroom he'd indicated, toweling myself dry, changing into the clothes Corvus produced, smelling faintly of wood smoke and thyme, but blessedly dry. I couldn't dispel a prickling unease. Perhaps it was merely the strangeness of finding refuge so unexpectedly, or the sheer density of peculiar objects crowding the small space. But an electric tension hummed beneath the surface, a feeling of held breath. Emerging, I found Corvus settled in a venerable armchair by the fire, nursing a steaming mug. He gestured with his chin towards a similar mug resting on a low table. "Sit," he commanded gently. "Drink, drive the chill out." I obeyed, sinking into the facing chair, my cold hands embracing the mug's comforting heat. The liquid within was dark, emitting a complex herbal fragrance unlike any tea I knew. "So," Corvus began after a companionable silence, "what errand brings you so deep into these woods, Silas? Few venture this far, fewer still, alone." I took a cautious sip, the warmth unfurling through my chest. Needed some space, I suppose. Life's felt tangled recently. Hoped a day immersed in the wild might simplify things. Corvus inclined his head, a gesture of ancient understanding. The wild has a way of doing that, stripping things down to the bone, showing what holds weight. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the flames, becoming distant. But it carries teeth too for the unwary. This forest, it has a habit of testing souls. Something in his cadence, a subtle shift, made me straighten. "What do you mean by that?" His focus snapped back to me, sharp as flint. "Tell me, Silas, what do you know of the provenance of this place, of these trees?" I shook my head. "Very little, truthfully. I'm not from these parts." A ghost of a smile touched Corvus's lips. "No, I sensed as much. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a murmur that barely rose above the fire's crackle. These woods are old, Silas, older than reckoning, and they hold secrets. A tremor traced its way down my spine, entirely unrelated to the lingering dampness. Secrets? What sort of secrets? Corvus's eyes glittered in the firelight. The sort most are not equipped to comprehend. But there's a seeking in you. I see it. You came looking for more than just a path through the trees, didn't you? I opened my mouth to refute it, but the denial died on my tongue. He saw true. I had come seeking something intangible, answers to questions I hadn't yet formed. He nodded, accepting my silence as affirmation. I thought as much. Well, Silas, perhaps you've wandered into precisely the right place. This forest, it provides what is needed, though often not what is sought. He rose with surprising agility, moving towards one of the overloaded bookshelves. His fingers traced spines before selecting a heavy, leather-bound volume. Here, he said, extending it towards me. This may illuminate things. I accepted the book, its weight substantial, the aged leather cool and smooth beneath my fingers. No title adorned the cover, only an elaborate embossed sigil, a tree, its intricate branches reaching skyward to cradle a crescent moon. What is this? I asked, tracing the design. A chronicle, Corvus replied, of this forest and those who have dwelled within it, those like myself, those who have witnessed. My gaze lifted to meet his, a knot of curiosity and apprehension tightening in my stomach. Witnessed what? Corvus's expression remained inscrutable. Open it, he urged softly. Read, and then we shall see if you are prepared for what follows. With hands that felt unsteady, I opened the tome. The pages, thick and yellowed, were filled with dense, looping script, interwoven with intricate, unsettling illustrations. As my eyes scanned the first lines, the world outside the book began to recede. The fire's snap and pop, the rain's rhythmic drumming on the roof, all faded to a distant hum. I fell into the narratives held within, tales of primordial rites enacted in shadowed groves, of beings that slipped between the trees, neither beast nor man, of wanderers who entered these woods and emerged, altered. I lost track of time. Minutes bled into an hour, perhaps longer. When at last I surfaced, Corvus was watching me, his expression intense, knowing. Do you perceive now? He inquired, his voice low. I swallowed, my throat tight. I'm not sure. These accounts, they cannot be literal truth, can they? Corvus's smile was a complex thing, tinged with sorrow and yet triumphant. Oh, they are truth, Silas, every syllable, and possessing this knowledge, it presents you with a juncture. A juncture? I echoed, the words sounding foreign. He nodded. You may depart. Return to the life you knew. Persuade yourself this was naught but the fever dream of a reclusive old man. He paused, his gaze locking with mine, deep and piercing. Or you can remain, learn, become woven into something far vaster than your solitary self. My eyes fell to the book cradled in my lap, then rose again to meet Corvus's stare. Outside, the storm still howled, a primal symphony. But here, within this small cabin brimming with impossible lore, I felt poised on the brink of something immense, terrifying, and utterly essential. What happens? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, if I remain? Corvus's smile deepened, reaching his eyes. Then, young Silas, your true pilgrimage commences. As if summoned, a deafening crack of thunder reverberated, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. The electric lights sputtered, died, plunging us into absolute darkness for a heartbeat. When they flared back to life, I gasped. The cabin was altered. The familiar log walls seemed to thrum with an unseen energy. The artifacts on the shelves pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. And Corvus? Corvus was dissolving, his human guise melting like wax, reforming into something ancient, elemental, and profoundly inhuman. Welcome, resonated the voice of the entity that had been Corvus, the sound vibrating not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones, to the viridian heart. In that instant, I understood my life had irrevocably fractured. The choice made here, in this crucible of storm and revelation, would set my feet upon a path from which there could be no turning back. Yet gazing into the fathomless eyes of this impossible being, I felt no terror, only a profound, resonant rightness, as though, after a lifetime of wandering, I had finally stumbled home. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, I declared my choice. I will remain, I said. Teach me. The entity inclined its head, a semblance of satisfaction crossing its otherworldly features. Then let it begin, it intoned. And as the tempest raged without, and the deep magic of the woods surged around us, I took my first hesitant step into a reality I had never dreamed existed. A world shimmering with wonder, shadowed by peril, and luminous with infinite possibility. "6 months ago, something sprawled in the ditch compelled my foot to mash the brake pedal. Now, the certainty it wasn't human flesh offers cold comfort. The silhouette remains, etched onto my nightly vision, rooted to that same patch of earth, right arm extended, thumb angled groundward, away from the treacherous bend of Miller's Curve. My existence unfolds under the banner of Apex Vital Care, navigating the night shift, a 10-hour pilgrimage delivering sterile necessities to nursing homes and hospice sanctuaries scattered across 3 counties. The compensation is adequate, the solitude a welcome balm. Since Ilara departed, Leo's small hand clasped in hers, the silence within our home had acquired a crushing weight. On the asphalt ribbon, at least, the quiet possesses an intrinsic rightness. Duty dictates a passage down Miller's Road each night, somewhere in the liminal space between 2 and 3 in the morning. 20 desolate miles of pavement, bisecting cornfields and pockets of dense woodland. No comforting streetlights pierce the gloom, no welcoming windows glow. Only darkness reigns, punctuated by the fleeting gleam of reflectors warning of sharp deviations. The nadir is Miller's Curve, a vicious hairpin embracing an ancient oak where the roadbed plunges a sheer 8 feet into a drainage channel. That inaugural night, my headlamps snagged on a dark mass tangled halfway down the embankment. I braked with enough violence to send cartons of urinary catheters skittering forward in the cargo bay. It bore the unmistakable shape of a man, face down in the mire, clad in black, one arm canted unnaturally. Flashlight gripped tight, phone ready, the rehearsed script for the emergency operator already forming on my tongue. Yet upon reaching the ditch's edge, this emptiness greeted me. No prone figure, no disturbance in the mud, not even a footprint, just sodden leaves and the glint of discarded beer cans. For 5 suspended minutes, I stood sentinel, the flashlight beam slicing the dark. Then, a flicker of white at vision's periphery. Turning, I saw it. A tall form poised at the curve's apex, perhaps 50 feet distant, right arm outstretched, thumb depressed. I called out. Silence answered. 3 steps I took toward it, and the presence dissolved. Exhaustion, I reasoned. A phantom born of double shifts, scraped together for Leo's upcoming birthday. But the following night, identical time, identical curve, it materialized again, motionless, right arm extended, thumb down. This time, I didn't hesitate. I drove on. For a week, the apparition became a nightly fixture, immutable in posture and position, sometimes glimpsed in the approaching glare of my headlights, other times a fleeting specter in the rearview mirror post-passage. Once, unsettlingly, I perceived it running parallel to my van, effortlessly matching my 45 miles per hour, but a second glance revealed only vacant roadside. I rerouted, embracing a circuitous path that bled an extra 40 minutes from my schedule. 2 weeks of this detour earned me a summons from my supervisor. Clients voiced displeasure over tardy deliveries. Miller's Road beckoned me back, and the figure, patient as stone, was waiting. Inquiries began. Whispers gathered at the truck stop flanking Miller's Road confirmed the local lore. Tales of a college girl swallowed by that stretch in '87, her vehicle discovered abandoned near the curve, ignition keys still patiently waiting. A local motorcyclist in '93, whose crash yielded only a helmet fractured like an eggshell, his body never reclaimed. The minivan in '06 that veered off, mother and children found submerged days later, still belted in their watery tomb, the father vanished without a trace. Obsessively, I documented every fragment, constructing spreadsheets, correlating meteorological conditions, lunar phases, some ambient temperatures. Rain or shine, new moon or full, sweltering summer nights or biting winter dawns, the figure manifested indifferent, the sole constant, the temporal window, always bracketed between 2 and 3 a.m. A dash cam yielded nothing but desolate road footage. An infrared camera registered anomalous cold spots precisely where the figure stood, yet offered no discernible shape. Motion-activated trail cameras deployed along the curve captured deer, raccoons, even a bewildered coyote, but never the sentinel. Last week, resolve hardened. Enough was enough. I would stop, confront it, touch it, whatever it took to anchor my sanity. Departing early, I parked at the curve by 1:45 a.m., silencing the engine but leaving the headlights to carve twin paths through a nascent fog creeping in from the fields. I sat, mesmerized by the dashboard's digital clock as minutes ticked glacially by. 2:17 a.m., a subtle shift in the side mirror. It was there, closer than ever before. Details emerged, previously obscured by distance and motion. The black coat resolved into a long, dark dress, stained with mud, its hem ragged and torn. The right arm wasn't merely extended, it was wrenched backward at an angle defying anatomy. The thumb wasn't pointing down the road ahead, but bent grotesquely backward, indicating the ditch itself. Slowly, deliberately, I exited the van, gaze locked on the form. The air temperature plummeted, a 20-degree drop in 3 paces. My breath plumed white. The figure remained inert, breathless, just standing, face shrouded in shadow, arm contorted, thumb directing. 10 feet. Close enough now to discern the dress wasn't just muddy, but saturated, dripping water that evaporated before striking the asphalt. 8 feet. The fog thickened, coiling around my ankles like frigid, spectral hands. 6 feet. A sharp, mechanical twitch disturbed the figure's head, reminiscent of a broken marionette. 4 feet. The cloying aroma of stagnant water and decay filled my nostrils. I halted, hand tentatively raised, mouth parting to speak. Its head so snapped upward. Where features should have resided, only black, viscous water poured forth from an empty cowl. The twisted arm shot out, seizing my wrist. The contact felt like plunging my limb into glacial depths. The thumb pressed hard into my palm. Not flesh, but something unyielding, smooth, small, metallic. Recoiling violently, I scrambled back to the van, driving 20 miles over the limit until the sanctuary lights of the truck stop appeared. I sat in the parking lot, tremors subsiding just enough to unfurl my fingers. There, imprinted deep into my skin, lay a small brass key. The intricate pattern cut into its head sparked recognition. It matched the account of the missing student's car, the abandoned vehicle, the one whose key was never found. The next night I returned. The figure stood, same place, same posture, but fear had yielded to understanding. I parked, walked to the precipice of the ditch. The fog materialized on cue. The temperature plunged, yet held no terror. Retrieving the key, I held it aloft. Instantly, the figure manifested beside me. The face of black water inclined toward the ditch's murky bottom. The broken arm pointed downward. Following the trajectory of that fractured thumb, my eyes caught a glint in the muck. Metal. Something that had lain in wait for 37 years. I descended, the mud greedily sucking at my boots. Near the bottom, half consumed by decades of sediment, rested a car. Rust had claimed much of it, but the silhouette of an early 80s Honda Civic remained discernible. The key slid into the trunk lock, as if completing a long-delayed reunion. Inside, cocooned in plastic, lay a sheaf of letters. Love letters, dozens, all addressed to the vanished student, all penned by her married professor, all meticulously detailing his plan, how he would orchestrate the appearance of an accident, how he would witness her car plunge off the road, how the secret would remain buried forever. But a witness remained, someone who had waited through the long years for a passerby to stop, to truly see, to listen. The police were summoned. They unearthed more than letters from that trunk. They found tangible evidence. They found answers. They delivered closure to a family suspended in unknowing for 37 agonizing years. I still traverse that route nightly, past Miller's Curve, past the scarred earth where the car was exhumed, past the spot the figure once occupied. It is gone now. The arm that indicated the path, the thumb that guided my descent, the face of black water that waited with such profound patience, vanished. Yet sometimes, when the fog unfurls its tendrils and the air bites with sudden cold, a fleeting shape registers in my rearview mirror, a form by the roadside, an arm raised not in supplication, but in silent acknowledgement, in gratitude. I don't stop anymore. There is no need. The presence found its quarry, the truth dredged from the mire, the key to its revelation, and an individual willing to pause and perceive. Now, driving past Miller's Curve between 2 and 3 in the morning, only vacant road stretches before me. The quiet here feels altered, not heavy like the stillness in my empty house, nor merely intrinsic like the hush of the night shift. It feels resolved, like a protracted vigil concluded, a narrative finally voiced. The key remains in my possession, not for necessity. The authorities collected the letters, the evidence. I keep it as a tangible reminder. Perceptions deceive. What appears as a body in a ditch might be a signal flare. What resembles a hitchhiker could be a silent witness. What masquerades as a ghost story might truly be a demand for justice. The professor's trial commences next month. Further searches of his residence yielded more incriminating letters, hinted at other victims, unearthed more secrets he believed securely entombed within the mud and water of Miller's Curve. I provided my statement recounting everything save the inexplicable elements, the figure, the face of black water, the impossible arm, the glacial touch, the key materializing in my palm. Certain realities resist translation for those who haven't navigated that specific road in the dead of night, who haven't witnessed what waits within the fog between 2 and 3 a.m. Ilara called last week. News travels. She'd heard about the delivery driver who cracked a decades-old case, who brought a killer towards reckoning, who offered a family solace after 37 years. Leo had asked about me, she said. Perhaps a visit could be arranged. I agreed readily. I told her I had stories to share, not of phantoms or fog-bound specters, real stories, about patience, about observation, about stopping to aid someone in need, even when the rationale remains obscure. The night shift continues. Deliveries proceed. Miller's Curve remains a nightly landmark between 2 and 3. But my focus now rests on the road ahead, not the mirror reflecting what's behind. Whatever waited there for 37 years has found its peace, its justice. Occasionally, other drivers inquire about the curve, the legends, the figure they swear they've glimpsed, arm extended. My counsel is simple. Drive with care. Watch the road. Remember that initial appearances can mislead. And should they ever perceive something in their headlights or reflected in their mirror, something waiting in the mist, arm outstretched, perhaps they'll recall my experience. Perhaps they'll remember that the most terrifying entity isn't always what lurks in the darkness. Sometimes it's what has been hiding in plain sight all along, awaiting someone willing to stop, to look closer, to listen, to help unearth the truth from the mud and water where it lay buried for so long. The figure has departed Miller's Curve, but countless other roads exist, other bends in the asphalt, other presences lingering in the shadows, each with its own narrative, yearning for release, its own truth demanding discovery. All they require is someone willing to stop. The house always sighed, settling timbers, the groan of wood under strain, mundane sounds I'd long ago cataloged and dismissed. Familiarity breeds contempt, even for fear. But the attic, up there, something shifted the narrative. No spectral shapes lurk in the gloom. No cascade of disturbed dust betrays a presence. Only this, a subtle thrumming beneath my soles when I ascend, a vibration answering my weight, as if the very floorboards syncopate with an unseen partner, mirroring my every tread. Mine is a solitary existence in this two-floored dwelling, crowned by the neglected cap of its attic. Cold country demands insulation, and the attic served this purpose, stuffed to the rafters with forgotten cartons and the detritus of years. I rarely ventured, the cramped, musty space holding no appeal, until storage became a pressing need. Boxes bulged with the ghosts of past employment, stacks of unread books leaned precariously, old garments sighed in their confinement, and a tangle of obsolete electronics waited for oblivion. An organizational purge was overdue. Clear the chaff, donate the salvageable, impose order on the chaos. So, I unfolded the narrow skeletal stairs from the ceiling hatch. A breath of stale, particle-thick air greeted me, the scent of time undisturbed. Above, the space huddled low, rafters like ribs under the roof's skin, ancient beams crossing the gloom. Cobwebs draped corners like macabre lace, and the lone bulb cast a weak, jaundiced glow. I began the excavation, yellowed periodicals, faded receipts, serpentine cables leading nowhere, fractured remnants of furniture banished years prior. Shifting a teetering column of boxes revealed an anomaly against the far wall. Peculiar, dark timber structures. Not mere supports, nor leftover framing from the house's birth. They formed partial partitions, strange skeletal frames suggesting no discernible function, their wood dark and weathered, seemingly older than the surrounding construction. Hidden until now. Gloved, I tested one upright. It stood firm, rooted, yet emitted a low, protesting creak. No nails, no screws, just archaic joinery, fitted with patient craft. A curiosity, nothing more. I pressed on, sorting, discarding, consolidating. An hour, perhaps two, dissolved in the dust before fatigue, and the clinging grit drove me downstairs, trash bags bulging. The strange wooden architecture remained, noted but unexamined. Sleep claimed me, then abruptly released me into the deep hush of night. A faint noise pricked the silence, the delicate complaint of wood under pressure. It echoed the house's usual repertoire, yet possessed a distinct rhythm, with a whisper-soft squeak, a pause, then its echo. Footfalls. Lying suspended between sleep and wakefulness, I marshaled familiar reassurances. An old house breathes, shifts, settles, yet a disquiet lingered. The sound ceased after a minute, and slumber reclaimed me. The following day beckoned me back to the attic's dusty embrace, task unfinished. Marker, tape, notebook in hand, I ascended, ready to label the survivors of the purge. As I moved across the floorboards, a peculiar sensation arose through my boots, a faint tremor, a subtle vibration in the wood. It felt disconcertingly like nearby pacing, steps falling just out of sync with my own. Paranoia, I reasoned, residue from the nocturnal disturbance. But as I navigated the clutter, shifting cartons, the vibration persisted. Not violent, but undeniably present. I knelt, palm flat against the planks. No visible flaw, no shifting sections. Yet rising, I heard it. A gentle creak just behind me, soft as an exhaled breath, perfectly timed to my movement. I spun, nothing but stacked boxes and the enigmatic wooden frames against the far wall. I stepped towards them. A soft sound answered from the opposite side of the small space, another board complaining in response. A step left, a faint squeak answered right. Holding my breath, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I listened. The pulse roared in my ears. The cramped confines offered no room for pursuit, only stillness. The moment I ceased movement, the responsive creaks fell silent. Ice traced a path down my spine. Settling wood is random. Responsive silence is not. Drawing a ragged breath, I forced myself back to the task, logic battling instinct. An acoustic quirk? Some resonance in the aged timber? A squirrel, perhaps? Or a raccoon seeking refuge? Yet no droppings, no gnawed wood, no entry points were visible. Only silence, punctuated solely by this strange auditory mirroring that began and ended with my own motion. 40 minutes later, nerves frayed, I retreated. Down the ladder, sealing the hatch felt like closing a tomb. In the living room, I sought normalcy. Errands, cooking, the flickering screen of the television. For a while, I succeeded. But that night, cocooned in bed, faint thuds resonated from above, measured, deliberate, like slow, heavy footfalls, pacing the length of the attic floor. I burrowed deeper under the covers, consciously slowing my breath. The sounds eventually faded, but tranquility remained elusive. Morning brought resolve, one final ascent. Evidence was needed, proof of pests, loose floorboards, structural faults, anything tangible. Pulling down the ladder, climbing into the familiar miasma of dust and decay, the air felt different, heavier. The single bulb flickered erratically as I tugged its chain, casting less light than before. I swept my gaze across the floor. Everything remained precisely as I'd left it. The same configuration of boxes, the same dark wooden sentinels brooding near the back. I paced, flashlight beam probing corners, illuminating shadowed recesses. No nests, no droppings, nothing to suggest animal intrusion. I deliberately stomped on several sections. The boards felt solid beneath my weight, yet they answered with that same muted, responsive creak. Drawn back to the mysterious wooden structures, I grasped one, attempting to shift it to glimpse what lay behind. It remained stubbornly immobile. Tapping the wood yielded only a dull, solid thud. As I turned to leave, the vibration returned, humming faintly through the soles of my shoes. A quick turn, flashlight beam slicing through the dusty air between boxes. Still nothing visible, but with each step I took, a soft squeak emanated from a different quadrant of the attic. It felt circular, like something was orbiting me in the gloom. My stomach clenched, muscles tightened across my shoulders. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. Keep calm, I told myself, but my breathing grew shallow. An experiment. I stood utterly still, mastering my breath. Silence. Then one deliberate long stride forward. From behind me, the attic answered with a slow, drawn-out creak. I whirled, light stabbing at the floor. Empty. A step sideways. Another squeak, this time from behind one of the timber frames. I walked a small, tight circle, and the sound tracked me, a phantom orbit mirroring my own. Sweat bloomed on my palms, an invisible presence pacing in perfect synchrony, always just beyond the edge of sight. The need to escape warred with a desperate compulsion to confirm this wasn't madness. I knelt again, placing my palm flat on the floorboards, pressing down gently. I felt it, a distinct, answering pulse in the wood beneath my hand. Once, then stillness. My heart felt dangerously large in my chest. Scrambling to my feet, I made for the ladder, mouth dry, legs unsteady. Down I climbed, fumbling slightly, pulled the ladder up, and slammed the hatch shut with a decisive thud. In the hallway below, I stood panting, listening. Nothing. Weeks passed. Avoidance became policy. Simply walking beneath the attic hatch sent a ripple of unease through me. My eyes invariably flickered upwards as I passed, anticipating a sound. At night, the subtle footstep-like noises sometimes returned from overhead. Not every night, but often enough to fracture sleep. Calling an inspector, an exterminator, how to articulate it, wood that responds, floorboards that vibrate in sympathy, sounds that mimic movement without a visible source. The explanation withered into paranoia before it could be voiced. Curiosity, however, is a persistent itch. Eventually, it gnawed through my fear. I contacted Marcus, a friend, proposing he help assess the attic for structural issues, carefully omitting the stranger details. He agreed, but work intervened, forcing a last-minute cancellation. I didn't press him. Perhaps a part of me needed to face this alone. Closure, I told myself. Armed with a headlamp and a small crowbar just in case, I ascended once more. The attic felt instantly oppressive, the air thick, cloying with dust that scratched at my throat. Slowly, I moved, light beams sweeping the floor. A few steps, the familiar creak under my own weight, immediately followed by the secondary, echoing squeak from elsewhere. Each footfall answered, my stomach churned. I directed the light towards the wooden structures at the back. There, between two beams, a faint gap I hadn't noticed before, small, perhaps wide enough to reach into. Shoving boxes aside, I crouched, knees protesting. The headlamp illuminated a swirling galaxy of dust motes. I pushed against one of the boards near the gap. It yielded slightly, resisting. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam. As the board shifted under the pressure, a loud, sharp creak exploded directly behind me, closer than ever before, as if someone stood just there, on a different section of floor. My heart threatened to batter its way out of my chest. "Hello?" The word emerged as a trembling whisper in the dead air. Silence answered. I swallowed hard, pulled again on the crowbar. The board moved a few inches, revealing darkness, an enclosed space seemingly empty. No glint of eyes, no discernible objects. A wave of foolishness washed over me. Then, a rapid flurry of distinct squeaks erupted around me, quick, light steps circling in the gloom. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wrenched the crowbar free, stumbling backward, nearly tripping over a box. The beam of my headlamp swung wildly. Nothing. Dust. Boxes. The ancient wooden frames. But the floorboards beneath my feet trembled, a palpable vibration, as if something unseen had just rushed past my back. I spun, light cutting the darkness. Still nothing. Every muscle locked. Sweat slicked my forehead. Enough. I scrambled towards the ladder hatch, my steps loud, frantic on the boards. And with every panicked footfall, the mimicking squeak pursued me, right at my heels. The sensation of being followed was absolute. Gripping the hatch edge, I descended, hands shaking so violently I nearly slipped. I hauled the ladder up, slammed the hatch door, slid the bolt home. In the hallway, breath tearing from my lungs, heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs, I listened. Silence. A tremor ran through my legs. Fear's aftershock. Wiping sweat from my face with my sleeve, I forced myself away, needing distance from the space directly beneath that sealed portal. I haven't returned. Weeks have bled into months. The knowledge that I must eventually, it's my house, my responsibility, sits like a stone in my gut. But every creak the old house makes at night now funnels my thoughts upwards. Sometimes, but standing directly below the hatch, holding my breath, I listen. Mostly, silence reigns. Occasionally, a single soft creak answers the stillness, then nothing. Rational explanations circle like weary vultures. Aging wood, wind pressure, temperature flux, an impossibly stealthy rodent. None adequately explain the responsive nature, the mirroring steps, the vibration that answers touch, the silence that falls when I fall still. I still live here, sleep here. Passing the attic ladder, I sometimes fancy I feel a subtle shift in the ceiling overhead, a faint resonance I quickly ignore. The hatch remains locked, those strange wooden dividers, the void behind them, they remain undisturbed. Did I awaken something by shifting those long undisturbed boxes? By prying at that sealed space? Did I disrupt a decades-long slumber? Answers elude me. I only know what I hear, what I feel in the protesting floorboards. It isn't loud. It doesn't rattle the house or follow me downstairs. But ascend into that dusty pocket of space, and it's there, waiting, pacing, tracking. No visible form, just the slow, deliberate creaks, footsteps woven into the wood's fabric. There is no proof, nothing to show. But the sound, the feeling, they are undeniably real. For now, the door stays shut. Pretending normalcy is the path of least resistance. If it wants the attic, it can have the damned space. Perhaps if I leave it utterly alone, it will remain quiet. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, not truly, but something resides in my attic, and it moves when I move. That much is certain, and it is enough to keep me firmly downstairs, door locked, listening to the faint, occasional whispers from above. A disquieting truce, perhaps, but a truce nonetheless. It's all I have. The heavy door yielded with a groan, admitting Ilara into the sepulchral quiet of the main atelier. Above, fluorescent tubes cast a sterile, buzzing light that did little to warm the cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the beams, carrying the scent of aged stone and forgotten time. Weeks Ilara had spent here, her focus narrowed to the minutiae of restoration. Hairline fractures, subtle discolorations marring the surfaces of calcified figures. The workshop sprawled, a concrete landscape populated by silent stone sentinels on weighty plinths. Giants loomed near diminutive forms, all bearing the patina of ages. High walls bristled with shelves laden with the tools of her trade, arrays of brushes, sea sponges, chemical concoctions in labeled jars, drifts of soft cloths. Tonight, solitude was her only companion. Possession of a key, a mark of her employer's confidence, granted her this nocturnal access. Nothing untoward had ever disturbed these late sessions, yet an unfamiliar tension prickled the air, a wrongness she couldn't pinpoint. Ilara navigated the labyrinth of statuary, her gaze cataloging the evening's intended tasks. She paused before a marble effigy of a woman, her features worn smooth, eyes vacant pools of stone. Setting down her canvas satchel, she retrieved a compact torch, a whisper-fine brush, and a small bottle of cleansing agent. A fissure snaked along the figure's neckline, her target for the night. Adjusting her portable lamp, she leaned in, squinting. The marble felt cool, impassive beneath her questing fingertips. Her hands, usually so sure, felt steady enough. Outside, the city slept. Only the spectral hum of the lights intruded. A faint current of air, inexplicable, brushed her cheek. Her eyes flicked to the statue's arm, its posture suddenly striking her as altered. Hadn't it rested closer to the torso? Memory, fallible and fatigued, offered uncertain counsel. Ilara consulted her phone, scrolling through reference photographs captured in brighter hours. There. The image showed the marble limb, positioned a clear 2 inches from the body. Now, observing it directly, the gap seemed halved. A frown creased her brow. Exhaustion, perhaps. Moving away, she sought familiarity in another piece. A stern-faced man, bearded and imposing, whose surface she'd meticulously cleaned over 2 prior nights. She recalled the precise arrangement of his hands upon the miniature plinth. Now, his stone fingers seemed subtly more contracted, curled inward at a fractionally different angle. She drew closer, her gaze intense, solid Thessalian marble, unyielding. She glanced away, then snapped her eyes back. No visible change occurred in that instant. The discrepancy was infinitesimal, yet a conviction solidified within her. Something was amiss. Deeper into the workshop she ventured, toward the rear where shadows pooled and the overhead lights offered only meager illumination. A figure hunched in a corner drew her attention. An anomaly. Its provenance was unknown to her. It radiated an antiquity surpassing the others. Vaguely anthropomorphic, its form lacked definition, devoid of face or clear features, hewn from a darker, rougher stone. Hesitantly, she traced its coarse surface, cold as expected. But then beneath the chill, after several seconds, a low, subtle vibration resonated against her palm. She froze, holding her breath. Impossibly, the stone seemed to possess a faint, rhythmic pulse. Lifting her hand, she pressed it back, firmer this time. The steady, almost imperceptible beat persisted. Her own heart hammered against her ribs. She snatched her hand away, eyes darting around the silent assembly. Nothing stirred. Stepping back, she swept her torchlight across the rows of statues. Each stood immutable, heavy, silent. Imagination, she told herself, forcing a long, slow exhale that did little to moisten her suddenly dry mouth. Returning to the brighter central area, she skirted several other sculptures, scrutinizing their positions. The urge to call someone surfaced, but the late hour and the fear of sounding unhinged held her back. Focus on the work, she commanded herself. Retrieving her brush, she approached the marble woman once more. Raising the tool, she began the delicate task of cleaning the fissure near the neckline. The soft, scratch of bristles on stone filled the immediate silence, punctuated by the chemical tang of the cleaning solution. Tension gathered in her shoulders. From the periphery of her vision, she monitored the statue's arm. No movement detected. 10 minutes passed in this strained concentration before a new sound intruded. Faint, insidious, not the electric hum. A whisper? She ceased brushing, listening intently. Silence answered, save for the accelerating tempo of her own breathing. Then, unmistakably, a soft susurrus breathed her name, seemingly from just behind her shoulder. Ilara spun around, heart leaping. Only the impassive ranks of statuary met her gaze, some shrouded in dust covers like patient ghosts, others starkly exposed. Her palms were slick with sweat. She wiped them absently on her trousers. Silence reigned again. No whisper. Clutching her torch, she moved cautiously toward the workshop's center, its beam probing the darkness, lingering on each sculpted face. Stone eyes stared forward, blank, rigid. She stood motionless, pulse thudding in her ears, waiting. Nothing happened. An experiment formed in her mind. She positioned herself several feet from a sculpture she knew intimately, a headless male torso, shoulders and chest only. She'd measured its exact placement just 2 nights prior while repairing a crack near the clavicle. Forcing herself, she looked away for a deliberate moment, then snapped her gaze back. The torso seemed angled differently, canted slightly more to the side. Or was it a trick of the torchlight? Crouching, she examined the dusty concrete floor around its heavy base. No footprints, no telltale drag marks. The pedestal was immense. Shifting it required significant effort. Reaching out, she touched the cool, still stone. She waited, tracing the edge with her light, but perceived no further motion. Rising, Ilara fought to regain composure. Perhaps she should leave. Fatigue could be playing tricks on her perception. Her head felt strangely light. One small task, she decided. Just finish one thing, then home. She moved to a sculpture depicting a pair of clasped hands and began brushing away accumulated dust, her strokes deliberately slow, measured. She focused on the sound, the soft rasp of brush on stone, nothing else. And then the whisper returned, quieter than before, almost subliminal. Her name, uttered twice. She whirled again, torch beams slashing through the air. The statues stood in perfect stillness, yet their familiar forms seemed subtly altered now, imbued with a latent tension she couldn't quite define. A knot formed in her throat. She swallowed repeatedly. Her stomach clenched. Methodically, she circled the room's perimeter, verifying the locked door at the far end. Heavy steel, secured by a coded lock. She keyed in the sequence. It functioned correctly. Pushing the door open a crack, she peered into the deserted hallway. Empty. The security camera's green indicator light glowed steadily. Normalcy. She pulled the door shut, the heavy click echoing, and returned to the charged atmosphere within. The thought of calling the owner resurfaced, but pride and professionalism warred with rising fear. A restorer should be rational, composed. Surely this was just exhaustion, isolation breeding phantoms. Ignoring the tremor in her hands, she approached the strange, faceless figure in the corner once more. She needed to confirm that impossible sensation. Carefully, deliberately, she placed her palm flat against its rough surface. The initial cold seeped into her skin. Holding her breath, heart pounding, she waited. Seconds stretched. Then, undeniably, the same subtle, rhythmic thrum pulsed beneath the stone. She recoiled, stepping back hastily. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She swiped at it with her sleeve. Her legs felt unsteady. Ilara, she murmured aloud, seeking anchor in her own name. Her voice sounded thin, fragile in the vast, quiet room. She retreated to a nearby workbench, her hand closing around the cold steel of a small chisel. The gesture felt absurd, yet comforting. The whisper sighed again, soft, pervasive, seeming to emanate from the very air around her, directionless. Her name, drawn out, elongated. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice swallowed by the space, echoing back unanswered. The fine hairs on her arms prickled, her gaze fixed on the nearest statue, a half-finished piece depicting a figure bent low. Circling it, she shone the light directly onto its rudimentary face. The stone was chipped, the mouth slightly agape. She studied its contours intently, looked away, looked back. The opening seemed wider now, undeniably so. Leaning closer, holding her breath, she caught the scent of dust mingled with something damp, earthy. Tentatively, she reached out with the chisel's point, tapping the edge of the stone mouth. A tiny flake detached, and then beneath her fingertips, she felt it. A minute, internal shift, a tremor. She stumbled back, nearly losing her balance. Backing further away, her torchlight played frantically across the silent assembly. Every statue now seemed subtly transformed. Arms, torsos, faces. None were precisely as she remembered, as they should be. She couldn't catch them in the act of moving, yet each time her gaze returned to a figure, after looking away, some minute alteration had occurred. A head tilted a fraction more, a hand imperceptibly raised. She tried blinking rapidly, hoping to witness the transition. Nothing. Yet the sense of pervasive, unseen rearrangement intensified. Her breathing grew shallow, rapid. The frantic beat of her heart resonated in her chest, her throat. Fumbling for her phone, she activated the video camera. Holding it unsteadily before her, she began a slow circuit of the room, documenting the impassive figures. "I'm in the workshop," she whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling. "Something's happening. The statues, they're moving when I'm not looking." She stopped recording, played it back immediately. On the small screen, the figures remained stubbornly inert, frozen moments captured in pixels. The video showed nothing unusual. Frustration warred with escalating terror. What could she do? Another idea sparked. Placing her torch on a high shelf, aiming its beam directly at one particular sculpture, she stepped back. Deliberately turning her body away, she strained her ears, listening into humming silence. A soft scraping sound reached her, faint but distinct, stone grating against stone. Her heart seized. She spun around. The statue's arm was unequivocally in a new position. Higher, more angled, certainty crashed over her, cold and absolute. This was real. Retrieving the torch, she approached the figure, solid, cold stone. But the limb had moved. A flush rose in her cheeks. Curses escaped her lips, muttered under her breath as she paced, torch beam sweeping erratically. The whisper returned, calling her name, seeming to swirl around her, now close, now distant. The vast room suddenly felt claustrophobic. Sweat trickled coldly down her spine. Toward the exit, she had to get out. Gathering her scattered tools, she shoved them haphazardly into her satchel, her hands shaking violently. She made for the door with the code panel, casting fearful glances over her shoulder. The statues stood motionless, yet she felt the weight of their collective, unseen gaze. The code entered, the lock clicked open. She pulled the heavy door inward, one final sweeping glance with the torch across the shadowed workshop. At the far end, a tall statue, notable for its missing arm, was now leaning forward slightly from the waist. It had been perfectly upright moments before. Her stomach lurched. She slipped through the doorway into the hallway, pulling the door firmly shut behind her. She fumbled with the lock, securing it. Her hand lingered on the cool metal. From inside, muffled but unmistakable, came another soft scraping sound. Her throat constricted. She swallowed hard. In the hallway, the steady fluorescent lights felt blessedly mundane. She drew a ragged breath, though her heart still hammered against her ribs. Her footsteps echoed on the polished tiles as she hurried toward the building's main exit. The air here smelled cleaner, institutional, free of the ancient dust. She rubbed her face with a trembling hand. Her shirt clung damply to her back. Her legs felt weak, so shaky. What had she witnessed? The impossibility of it churned in her mind. Would they reset by morning, or remain in their subtly altered poses? All she knew was the overwhelming imperative to escape. Passing a small dark storeroom, she hesitated for a fraction of a second. Check other rooms? See if the strangeness extended beyond the atelier? No. The thought repulsed her. She wanted no further encounters. Straight for the main exit. Pushing through the final door, the cool night air struck her face like a reprieve. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady her racing pulse. The street outside was deserted, hushed save for the distant hum of a passing car. Behind her, the building stood silent, monolithic. She stood on the pavement, satchel slung over her shoulder, mind reeling. Call the owner now? Explain what? Strange noises? Unstable statues? The words sounded flimsy, irrational even to her own ears. Home. She would go home, return tomorrow, but not alone. She could ask Kaylin from the antiquities department to assist her. perhaps feign needing help shifting a heavy piece, watch his reaction, see if he noticed anything. For now, distance was paramount. She walked quickly down the quiet sidewalk, the tension in her neck and shoulders a physical ache. Her face felt hot. She kept wiping her damp palms on her trousers. The memory of the faceless statue's surface, that horrifying subtle pulse beneath the stone, replayed in her mind. The whispers calling her name, the arm that moved, the shifting gazes. She risked one look back at the building. Its windows were dark voids. The great steel door remained impassively shut. She pictured the statues inside, standing in the humming darkness, silent, still, perhaps, their blank eyes fixed on nothing. Turning away resolutely, she continued walking. Reaching her car, she fumbled with the key, unlocked it, and scrambled inside, slamming the door and immediately locking it. Leaning back against the headrest, she breathed heavily through her nose, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. The engine turning over felt like a small victory. She pulled away from the curb, checking the rearview mirror compulsively. Empty streets stretched behind her. The workshop vanished from sight. Shaking her head, she tried to force her thoughts elsewhere, anywhere else. But the memory of that subcutaneous thrum beneath cold stone persisted, and the echo of the whisper lingered, promising a long, sleepless night ahead. The silence of Viridian Dynamics wasn't merely quiet. It was a vacuum, a sterile absence of sound that made the sudden intrusion of the chant feel like a physical blow. It began as a tremor beneath the polished floors, a sub-audible thrumming that coiled through the deserted wings of the research complex long after midnight. My shift, usually a predictable circuit of locked doors and silent monitors, fractured right then. This wasn't the hum of machinery gone awry. This was something else, something ancient and utterly misplaced within these walls of chrome and glass. My name is Javier. For 6 unremarkable months, I'd walked these halls, a guardian of secrets I had no desire to know, ensuring the facility's nocturnal integrity. Routine patrols, security checks, the quiet companionship of surveillance feeds, that was the rhythm of my life here. Until that night, until the chanting began. Past 2 in the morning, the sound solidified, resolving from a vibration into a low, polyphonic drone. It emanated from the deepest strata of the facility, a place I knew primarily as a designation on a map, Sector Gamma. Curiosity, that treacherous human impulse, warred with the ingrained habit of procedure. The noise wasn't mechanical, it was vocal, a chorus of voices weaving a liturgy in syllables that scraped against my understanding, utterly alien. Adrenaline prickled my skin as I navigated towards the restricted sector. Gamma was forbidden territory, its purpose shrouded in speculation even among the day shift researchers. Heavy blast doors, designed to contain more than just corporate secrets, marked its boundary. I'd always felt a low-grade unease near it, but tonight the air itself felt charged, thick and expectant. The access panel beside the main portal glowed a steady, permissive green. Someone was already inside. Against every regulation hammered into me during training, my hand bypassed the radio clipped to my belt. That insistent, damnable curiosity won. My own key card, surprisingly, granted access. The heavy door sighed open. Inside, the chanting swelled, reverberating down the dimly lit passage. The air grew denser, electric, raising the fine hairs on my arms. A strange pressure built behind my eyes. Rounding a bend, I saw it. A sliver of cold, unnatural light bleeding from beneath a door at the corridor's terminus. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat threatening to betray my presence. I moved with excruciating slowness, placing my ear against the cool metal. The individual voices within were now discernible, chillingly familiar. Dr. Eris Thorne, head of bioanomalies. Dr. Ilara Vance, whose work in theoretical astrophysics bordered on the metaphysical. Others, too, their tones subtly distorted, possessing a resonance that felt disturbingly non-human. Holding my breath, I risked a glance through the reinforced observation window set into the door. The scene within fractured my perception of reality. A vast chamber crammed with esoteric apparatus unlike anything I'd ever conceived of, coils humming with unseen forces, arrays of lenses focused on nothing visible. At the room's heart stood a colossal engine of impossible geometry, bathing everything in a ghastly, cerulean luminescence. Around it, robed figures, Thorne and Vance among them, stood with arms upraised, their faces ecstatic masks as the inhuman chant poured from their lips. The robes shimmered with sigils that seemed to writhe and twist, inducing a nauseating vertigo if looked at directly. But the true horror unfolded within their circle. Space itself appeared to fray, to tear like stressed fabric, offering nauseating glimpses of elsewhere. A churning void, colors that screamed, geometries that defied sanity. A choked gasp escaped me, a pathetic sound lost in the ritual's drone, yet somehow it cut through. Every head in the chamber snapped towards the door, towards me. Thorne's face contorted, fury warring with something that looked terrifyingly like fear. Interloper, his voice cracked like stressed rock. Secure him. Instinct took over. I spun, boots skidding on the immaculate floor, and fled. Shouts echoed behind me, the heavy thud of pursuit gaining. I burst back through the main portal of Sector Gamma, lungs searing, the sterile air outside feeling blessedly normal, yet tainted. Get out. Report this. But the thought immediately soured. Who would possibly believe such a tale? Rounding a sharp corner, I collided hard with an unyielding form. Dr. Vance stood before me, blocking my path. Her eyes, they weren't right. They held an ancient luminosity, a cold fire that belied her familiar features. You were not meant to witness this, Javier, she stated, her voice a strange counterpoint, her own calm tones overlaid with a sibilant whisper that felt millennia old. But Providence, perhaps, has offered you a choice. I stumbled back, mind struggling to reconcile the woman I exchanged pleasantries with, near the coffee machine with the figure before me. What is happening down there? That thing? A smile touched her lips, but it held no warmth, only a chilling, predatory intelligence. We are transcending limitations, Javier, reaching across the veil. The entities we commune with offer knowledge, power beyond your species' wildest imaginings. My head swam. This is madness. You're meddling with... Her laughter was sharp, brittle, sending a fresh wave of ice down my spine. Control? Oh, we are far beyond such petty concerns. A new epoch is dawning. You saw the threshold. You can cross it with us. Embrace the truth we've unveiled. For a sickening moment, the allure was potent. Power. Understanding the universe's hidden mechanisms. But the memory of that tearing void, the fundamental wrongness of it, anchored me. The revulsion reality itself seemed to exhibit. No. The word was surprisingly firm in the echoing corridor. Whatever you're doing, it's an abomination. It's dangerous. I want no part of it. Dr. Vance's expression hardened into something inhumanly resolute. A regrettable decision. Your silence is now a regrettable necessity. She moved with impossible speed, her fingers blurring, elongating into needle-sharp claws aimed at my throat. I threw myself sideways, felt the wind shear past my face as her strike met empty air. No more thought, only flight. The following moments dissolved into a panicked fugue state. Alarms shrieked as I deliberately triggered every security sensor I passed, hoping to sow chaos, to leave a trail. Behind me, the sounds were no longer merely human pursuit. Guttural howls mingled with the crash of equipment. I finally burst into the pre-dawn gloom of the employee parking lot, fumbling desperately for my keys, breath sobbing in my chest. As my tires screamed pulling away, I glanced back. Silhouettes were emerging from the main entrance, shapes that writhed and shifted, retaining only a mocking semblance of the scientists I'd known hours before. I drove aimlessly through the gray morning, thoughts racing like frantic rats in a cage. What cosmic horror had Viridian Dynamics unleashed? What were those beings they sought to bargain with? And what, dear God, could I possibly do? The authorities would dismiss me as delusional. Yet a chilling certainty settled in my gut. The influence behind this reached far beyond a single facility, perhaps entwining with powers I dared not contemplate. At a desolate truck stop smelling of diesel and stale coffee, a plan began to form. Anonymous cash purchased a disposable phone. My contacts were few, but I started dialing. A skeptical journalist I knew vaguely, a former military friend who dealt in shadows, anyone who might possess the necessary paranoia to listen. It felt pitifully inadequate, a single voice against a choir of madness. I knew the things that were once Thorne, Vance, and the others, would hunt me. The consequences of capture were unthinkable, but the image of that tearing reality, the glimpse behind the curtain, was seared into my mind. Ignorance was no longer an option. Knowing meant acting. Merging back onto the highway, heading towards an utterly unknown destination. The scale of the shift was staggering. Yesterday, Javier, the night watchman, concerned with coffee breaks and quiet corridors. Today, a fugitive carrying knowledge that felt radioactive, knowledge that could rewrite humanity's future or erase it entirely. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, not the path I'd chosen. It was the path that had chosen me, in a dimly lit corridor beneath a laboratory dabbling in cosmic catastrophe. Whether I lived to see the conclusion of this terrifying game was irrelevant. I wouldn't stand idly by. I couldn't. The deadbolt's final metallic sigh sealed the door, a sound that resonated deep in my bones, cold and absolute. In that precise instant, the knowledge settled. This desolate room at the Havenwood Motel wasn't just shelter. It had become our cage, and the quaint, elderly proprietors, they were curators of something far removed from simple hospitality. It was meant to be merely a pause, a punctuation mark in the monotonous sentence of a 14-hour drive to Alara's sister's wedding. We'd navigated hours of asphalt ribbon, our conversation fraying into short-tempered barbs over maps and missed turns, fatigue of viscous film clouding our judgment. Then, piercing the encroaching twilight, the skeletal neon buzz of vacancy beckoned. The Havenwood. It appeared like an unlikely deliverance. Time had clearly gnawed at its edges, paint flaking like sunburnt skin, light sputtering with a weak, intermittent pulse. But exhaustion had lowered our standards to needing little more than 4 walls and a horizontal surface. An antique bell, perched above the office door, chimed our entrance into the vacant space. Silence hung thick for a beat before an old woman drifted from a back room. Silver hair sculpted into an impeccable bun framed a face etched with a web of fine wrinkles, her smile radiating practiced warmth. "Well now, greetings," she offered, her voice possessing the comforting timbre of worn velvet. "Seeking refuge for the night, are we?" We murmured assent, adrift sailors grateful for any shore. While Alara navigated the check-in ritual, my gaze snagged on an old man observing us from the shadowed threshold of the back room. Silas, she'd called him. His scrutiny was unnervingly intense, a predatory stillness about him. When our eyes met, his flickered away, retreating into the gloom. "I'm Agnes, and that's my Silas," the woman chirped, pressing a heavy brass key into my palm. "None of those plastic cards here. You'll be in number 7, right down at the far end. Anything you require, you just give a holler." Murmuring thanks, we trudged towards the room. It was Spartan, yet passably clean, the air thick with the scent of old dust and disinfectant. Faded cabbage roses patterned the walls, and the bed protested with a groan that echoed the weariness in our bones. Still, it promised rest. Dinner was a dismal affair procured from hallway vending machines, the town's sole culinary offering, it seemed, before we surrendered to the promise of oblivion. Sleep was a shy creature, easily startled. I hovered on its edge when a sound outside snapped me back. Footsteps, slow, unnervingly deliberate, pausing just beyond our door. breath held captive in my chest. I strained against the silence. A moment stretched, then the tread moved onward. Another guest, surely. Yet a cold knot tightened in my gut, refusing to dissolve. Did you hear that? Ilara's whisper sliced through the quiet. She was awake, too. Yeah, I breathed back. Likely nothing. Sleep. But sleep remained elusive. Each groan of the ancient structure, every nocturnal sigh from a world outside, became amplified, sinister. A wrongness permeated the place, intangible but insistent. Then, near 2 a.m., it came, a choked-off shriek, abruptly stifled, seemingly close by. Ilara jolted upright, her eyes wide saucers of fear in the dimness. What was that? She hissed, voice trembling. Don't know, I answered, already swinging my legs out of bed, reaching for my jeans. Stay put. I'm going to see. Are you insane? Ilara clutched my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You can't go out there. But a grim certainty had taken hold. Ignoring her plea, I planted a quick, hopefully reassuring kiss on her forehead and slipped out the door. The night air clung cool and damp to my skin. The silence reigned once more, absolute and unnerving, erasing any trace of the disturbance. I moved cautiously along the walkway, senses screamingly alert. Passing room 3, I caught it, a low, muffled weeping from within. I pressed my ear flat against the painted wood. Again, the sob, punctuated by what sounded chillingly like a man's voice, low and menacing. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Police? But my sense of location was hazy, lost somewhere on a forgotten highway. Response time felt terrifyingly abstract. Knock. What if I'd misheard, misjudged? Before indecision could paralyze me, a hand clamped onto my shoulder like a vice. I spun, fists half raised, confronting the flinty gaze of Silas. Everything satisfactory, son? He inquired, his tone deceptively placid. Bit late for a constitutional, isn't it? I thought I heard something. I stammered, feeling suddenly exposed, foolish. A scream, maybe. Silas's grip tightened, fingers digging painfully into muscle. Ah, likely just the television. Folks enjoy their fright pictures, you understand. Best head on back to your room now. Wouldn't want the missus to fret. The mention of Ilara, how did he know I wasn't alone? Jolted me. Right, I managed, striving for nonchalance. Sorry to disturb. Good night. I retreated towards room 7, acutely aware of Silas's unblinking stare, tracking my every step. The moment I was inside, the deadbolt slammed home. I turned to Ilara, perched rigidly on the edge of the bed, her face a mask of terror. We're leaving, I declared, already snatching our bags. Right now. What? Why? What did you see? Words tumbled out in a rushed, whispered explanation as we scrambled into clothes, stuffing belongings haphazardly. Skepticism warred with fear in her eyes, but the raw urgency in my voice must have tipped the scale. We reached for the door handle just as we heard it, the distinct, sickening scrape and click of a key turning in the lock from the outside. Panic, cold, and visceral surged through me. Grabbing Alara's hand, I yanked her towards the bathroom, easing the door shut behind us with agonizing care. We crammed ourselves into the narrow confines of the bathtub, breath held tight, listening as the room door creaked open. Footsteps echoed, slow, measured, the same deliberate tread as before. Now, Agnes's voice crooned, cloyingly sweet. No need for concealment, my dears. We only wish to chat. Ilara's fingers dug into my arm. My eyes darted wildly, searching for a weapon, anything. A flimsy plastic shower curtain, miniature bars of soap, useless. The bathroom doorknob rattled. Come along out, Silas's gruff voice added its weight. Don't complicate matters unnecessarily. My thoughts raced, frantic. Robbery? But the hungry gleam I'd seen in Silas's eyes, the smothered sounds from room 3, this felt deeper, darker. The door crashed inward. Agnes and Silas filled the frame, their kindly facades evaporated, replaced by masks of cold calculation. Silas brandished a cruelly curved knife. Agnes clutched a black satchel, unnervingly like a physician's bag. Well, look at this. A pair of little troublemakers, Agnes said, her smile twisting into a predatory leer. Can't have you scurrying off, upsetting our arrangements, can we? What do you want? I demanded, injecting bravado I didn't feel into my voice. Silas emitted a low chuckle, utterly devoid of warmth. Oh, it's not about our desires, boy. It's about our clientele's needs, and they compensate handsomely for fresh acquisitions, healthy specimens like yourselves. Ice traced a path down my spine as the horrifying implication struck. Trafficking, organs, whatever the specifics, the reality was lethal. Now, Agnes purred, rummaging in her bag. This will be but a brief sting. Then you'll simply awaken elsewhere, prepared to serve your new purpose. As she advanced, syringe glinting primal instinct detonated within me. I launched myself at Silas, a desperate tackle that sent us sprawling, the knife skittering across the linoleum. Ilara shrieked as Agnes lunged for her, but Ilara, fueled by terror, fought back fiercely, striking the syringe from the old woman's grasp. Chaos erupted, a tangle of limbs, grunts, and desperate blows in the suffocating space. I connected a solid right to Silas's jaw, stunning him momentarily. Scrambling upright, I saw Ilara had somehow locked Agnes in a chokehold, her face flushed crimson with effort. "Run!" I bellowed, seizing Ilara's hand, pulling her free. We burst from the bathroom, through the room, and into the blessed cool of the night. Behind us, enraged shouts pursued us, Silas and Agnes spitting fury. We ran, propelled by pure terror, bare feet slapping against the cold asphalt, lungs searing. Directionless, our only imperative was distance from that house of horrors. Minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, salvation flickered ahead, the welcoming lights of a 24-hour truck stop. We stumbled through the doors, gasping, disheveled, undoubtedly appearing crazed to the startled night cashier. "Please," Ilara choked out between ragged breaths. "Police, the motel, Havenwood, The cashier, bless her pragmatic soul, wasted no time on questions. One look at our ravaged state was enough. She reached for the phone. The subsequent hours dissolved into a bleary montage of police interviews and styrofoam cups of bitter coffee. As dawn painted the horizon in bruised purples and tentative gold, the full, grotesque truth emerged. The Havenwood Motel, a facade of innocuous decay, had served for years as a nexus for a human trafficking ring. Agnes and Silas, aliases naturally, had perfected the art of luring weary travelers into their web, drugging them, and delivering them to the highest bidder. We were the fortunate ones, the anomalies who slipped through the mesh. Countless others hadn't. Finally pulling away from the truck stop, profoundly late for the wedding, but irrevocably altered, I couldn't shake the image of how close we'd skirted the abyss. A single, fatigue-driven decision had nearly cost us our existence. Now, small, isolated motels hold no charm. Our journeys are meticulously planned, confined to reputable chains and populated zones. Call it paranoia, perhaps. But having stared into the eyes of monsters disguised as kindly innkeepers, we understand better than most. Sometimes, the most terrifying vacancies are hidden behind the friendliest smiles. There exists a particular stillness, native only to the deep woods, a hush that isn't tranquil, but tense, expectant, as though the very air holds its breath. This was the quality of quiet that descended the night my world tilted off its axis. Solitude camping was no stranger to me. I'd courted the wilderness alone countless times. Yet this excursion felt different, tinged with something unfamiliar from the moment I arrived. My chosen sanctuary lay deep within the forest's embrace, miles from any marked trail or fellow soul. A pocket of isolation, precisely as I preferred, just myself, the ancient trees, and the indifferent scatter of stars. Late summer presided, the days retaining a languid warmth, while nights hinted at the coming chill. I erected my small haven, a dome of nylon beside a clearing bordered by a dense phalanx of pines, a spot perfectly excised from the noise of civilization. No signal bars, no digital tethers, the very isolation I craved. The first day unfolded with predictable rhythm, gathering fallen branches, securing my temporary home, tracing forgotten game trails nearby. As dusk bled across the sky, a modest fire crackled, its smoke mingling with the resinous perfume of pine, painting the air with scent. When the sun finally surrendered the horizon, shadows elongated, stretching like specters, and the woods assumed a darker, more enigmatic character. But it wasn't until my fire dwindled to a pulse of embers that the silence truly registered. Initially, I dismissed it. Woods grow quiet after dark, a natural cadence. This, however, was absolute. A profound, weighted stillness settled, as if every cricket, every rustling leaf, every nocturnal whisper had been abruptly silenced. The world beyond my small circle of light felt void, swallowed by an encroaching null. A prickle of unease traced my spine. Ridiculous, I chided myself. Just the vastness pressing in. Loneliness in the wild was familiar territory, never before a source of fear. Yet this particular silence felt invasive, raising gooseflesh. I prodded the embers, coaxing a brief flare that painted the surrounding trees in flickering relief. They seemed to lean closer, their boughs weaving intricate, dancing shadows. A distinct sensation arose. I was being observed. Shaking my head, I fought the irrationality. Just the forest. Nothing lurked here but flora, fauna, and me. Still, the feeling clung, a persistent burr, prompting furtive glances into the impenetrable darkness beyond the fire's glow, searching for an undefinable something. By the time I retreated into the tent, the air had acquired a distinct bite, the quiet deepening into something almost solid. Zipping the flap felt like sealing myself in a fragile bubble against the unease churning within. Sleep, however, remained elusive. Each time my eyelids drifted shut, the conviction returned. Something waited just outside, patient. Hours must have passed in this liminal state before oblivion claimed me, only for a sound, movement outside the tent, to tear me back to consciousness. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering against my ribs. Silence. Had I dreamt it? I strained my ears, listening past the frantic thrum in my chest. The woods remained unnervingly still. Then again, a faint rustle, the sound of something shifting through the leaf litter near my shelter. My hand, trembling, found the flashlight, fumbled with the switch. A stark white beam sliced the interior gloom, throwing my own shadow large and distorted onto the nylon walls. Listening. There, again, a slow, almost meditative rustling, followed by the distinct shh of something brushing against the tent fabric itself. My breath hitched. This was no animal, not like any I knew. The movement felt too deliberate, too aware. Whatever was out there possessed an unnerving purpose. Drawing a ragged breath, attempting composure, I eased the zipper down just enough to peer out. The fire was long dead, the campsite submerged in profound darkness. My flashlight beam swept across the tree trunks, finding nothing amiss. Only the vacant woods, utterly still. Yet the feeling persisted, potent and visceral. Something lurked just beyond the light's reach, watching. For an age, it seemed, I remained frozen, half exposed, flashlight beam trembling, probing the shadows. The sound never returns. The forest held its breath once more, and gradually, the intense sensation of being watched receded, though it never entirely vanished. Eventually, reasoning wrestled fear into submission. A falling branch, perhaps. A foraging creature. Nothing more. I zipped the tent tight again, lay back down, but sleep was a shattered thing. Every faint nocturnal sigh of the wind, every creak of branch on branch, sent jolts through my system. I lay wide-eyed in the oppressive dark, listening to the profound silence, waiting. Sleep must have overtaken me eventually, for the next awareness was morning light filtering through the canopy, dappling the tent. The air held a gentle warmth. Everything appeared ordinary, serene even. A wave of foolishness washed over me, my imagination running wild in the dark. Emerging, stretching, I surveyed the campsite, all as I'd left it. The stone fire ring, my cooking pot, the backpack leaning against a mossy log. Then my gaze snagged on the ground. Footprints, faint, yet undeniable, leading from the tree line directly to the side of my tent. Not animal tracks. These were larger, disturbingly human-like. Ice sluiced through my veins. Crouching, I followed their path with my eyes. They described a near-perfect circle around the tent before retreating back into the dense woods, vanishing as if the walker had dissolved into the trees. Who could possibly be out here? No other camps existed for miles. No trails led this deep. And if someone had been here, why remain hidden? Why simply observe? A creeping dread solidified as I began packing, my movements jerky, hands unsteady stuffing gear into the backpack. Another night here was unthinkable, haunted by the knowledge of that silent, nocturnal visitor. The return hike felt radically different. Trees that yesterday seemed majestic now appeared menacing, their shadows grasping like skeletal fingers. Every snapped twig, every rustle of unseen life sparked a fresh surge of adrenaline. I felt utterly exposed, pursued by unseen eyes. Reaching the car felt like breaching a sanctuary. I tossed the pack onto the passenger seat, slammed the door, heart pounding a frantic rhythm as the engine coughed to life. Turning onto the dirt track, I risked a final glance back towards the trailhead and saw it, a figure, barely discernible amongst the trees, standing just within the forest's edge, watching me depart. Tall, unnervingly slender, its features lost to shadow. It remained perfectly still, silent, simply observing. No time to decipher, no desire to understand. I stomped on the accelerator, the car lurching forward and tires spitting gravel. My hands clenched the wheel, trembling until miles had unspooled behind me, until the familiar asphalt and the mundane pulse of civilization surrounded me once more. What stalked the woods that night, what watched from the tree line, remains unknown, but the deep forest no longer calls to me. Its silence is no longer a refuge, and sometimes, when the world grows quiet, I feel it again, that cold certainty that somewhere, nestled deep among the ancient trees, something waits and watches. The project schematic swam before Elias's eyes, blueprints blurring into meaningless lines after a night sacrificed to the corporate maw. 4 a.m. bled through the blinds. He was utterly spent, a husk animated only by the primal need for sleep. His small house stood sentinel in Maple Creek, Ohio, a pocket of serene monotony where life unfolded with comforting regularity. Lawns were manicured, fences white, ambitions modest. Excitement was a foreign dialect here, a disruption Elias actively shunned. He craved the predictable rhythm, the quiet hum of suburban existence. But this pre-dawn hour, tranquility fractured. Scarcely had his head met the pillow, the cool embrace of the sheets, a promise of oblivion, when the telephone erupted. Its sudden shriek tore through the stillness, a physical jolt. Elias fumbled for the device, screen glaring harshly in the dark. Unknown number. A phantom caller at this ungodly hour. Probably digital detritus, yet an instinct he couldn't name compelled him to answer. His voice, thick with fatigue, rasped, "Yes." Only static answered, or rather, the impression of static overlaying something else. He waited, poised on the edge of disconnection. Then, distinct and unnerving respiration, slow, measured, impossibly close through the receiver. "Hello?" he tried again, a thread of irritation weaving through the weariness. The breathing persisted, a steady, intimate rhythm. Then, a voice, barely a filament of sound, a chilling susurrus. "Stay inside." Elias sat bolt upright, the exhaustion momentarily burned away by adrenaline. "Who is this?" The demand was sharp, cutting the air. "What is it you want?" Silence stretched, taut, and absolute. A faint click signaled the line's death. He stared at the inert phone, a cold dread blooming in his chest. A prank, surely. Some bored teenager wielding anonymity like a weapon. He forced himself back down, commanded his eyes shut, sought the refuge of sleep. But the whisper lingered, an echo refusing to fade. Stay inside, absurd, illogical, yet deeply unsettling. Sleep remained elusive. Surrendering, Elias swung his legs out of bed, scrubbing at his eyes. 4:30 a.m. Dawn wasn't far off. Coffee, perhaps? A jump start on the day he already dreaded. As the thought formed, a sound intervened, a soft, hesitant rap at the front door. He froze, every nerve ending suddenly alight. Solitude was his norm. Pre-dawn visitors were anomalies of the highest order. His gaze flickered to the phone, silent. The knock repeated, firmer this time, insistent. Heart thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird, Elias crept towards the entrance, leaving the lights off, moving through the shadowed house like a wraith. He reached the door, rose onto the balls of his feet, peered through the fisheye lens of the peephole. Nothing. Empty porch, silent street. A frown creased his brow. Pulse still racing, he pressed his ear flat against the cool wood, listening intently. Only the ambient hum of the sleeping neighborhood reached him. He began to turn away, dismissing it, when the knock returned, a forceful, near-violent pounding that reverberated through the door. He recoiled, mind scrambling. Police? What would he report? A phantom knocker at sunrise? He drew a ragged breath, steeling himself, hand inching towards the deadbolt. But the spectral voice resonated. Stay inside. His fingers hovered, paralyzed by the memory. Just a prank, his rational mind insisted, a stupid, elaborate joke. Yet the chill crawling up his spine felt anything but amusing. The assault on the door ceased abruptly. Elias waited, coiled, every muscle taut, straining to hear. Utter silence returned. He retreated a step, gaze locked on the impassive wood, caught in indecision. Then the phone screamed again. He snatched it up, hands trembling, the screen displaying the same ominous legend, unknown number. Anger warred with fear as he answered, his voice tight. Who is this? What do you want? The familiar, deliberate breathing filled the line. Then the whisper, softer, colder. Stay inside. Don't open the door. His heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. "Who are you?" he pleaded. "What is happening?" Only the sound of respiration answered before the connection severed once more. Clutching the phone like a talisman, Elias stood rooted, pulse a frantic tremor beneath his skin. Ignore it? Heed the warning? It felt staged, theatrical, yet the quality of that voice, its chilling intimacy, burrowed under his skin. He chose caution, backing away from the door, eyes scanning the entrance, ears straining for the slightest sound. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The first tentative rays of sunlight began to paint the eastern sky, filtering weakly through the windows. He finally exhaled, a breath held captive for too long, and moved towards the kitchen, the need for caffeine a grounding, mundane anchor against the encroaching dread. He was measuring coffee grounds when it came again, not at the door, but a sharp, distinct tap against the kitchen window pane above the sink. Elias spun around, heart seizing, staring at the closed blinds. A dim silhouette flickered behind them, indistinct yet undeniably present, the shape of someone standing just beyond the glass, waiting. He stumbled back, instinct screaming retreat. Call the police, now. But the words still wouldn't form. The situation felt porous, unreal, a waking nightmare bleeding into the ordinary world. His phone vibrated against the counter, another summons from the unknown number. Revulsion warred with a desperate need for answers. He pressed accept, the phone slick with sweat in his trembling grasp. "Don't look," the whisper commanded, immediate, urgent. "Don't look at the window." A glacial cold seeped into his bones. "Who are you?" he breathed, the question barely audible. Silence held sway for a beat. Then, just before the final, inevitable click, one last fragment of sound. "They're watching." The line died. Elias stood frozen, phone heavy in his hand, the words echoing in the sudden quiet. He understood nothing, the caller's identity, the motive, the nature of the threat. Yet one terrifying certainty crystallized. Something waited outside, something that forbade his gaze. He retreated from the window, sinking to the relative safety of the floor, phone clutched tight, mind racing like trapped static. He waited, scarcely daring to breathe, listening. Time dissolved, the sun climbed, bathing the room in the innocuous light of a new day, yet offering no comfort. Every glance towards the window brought a fresh wave of that icy dread, the profound, unnerving conviction of being observed. Eventually, summoning a fragile courage, he crept to the window, easing the blinds apart by a mere fraction. Nothing. The lawn lay empty, the street placid. Maple Creek slumbered on, oblivious. But Elias knew. He knew the emptiness was a facade. They remained unseen, vigilant, and every night since the ritual repeats. The knock, the tap, the shrill summons of the phone, and always the same disembodied whisper, a constant chilling refrain. Stay inside. Don't look. They're watching. Their eyes. That was the precipice, the point where pleasant illusion shattered against terrible truth. Gazing into those twin pools, glacial, vacant, utterly barren of the empathy that defines us, I understood my catastrophic error. These were not the benevolent country folk they'd so convincingly portrayed. They were other, and I ensnared within their timeless hamlet, had no path back to the world I knew. It began, as such descents often do, bathed in the light of naive aspiration. Europe unfurled before me, a 3-month tapestry woven from the threads of a post-collegiate dream, a final gasp of liberty before the tailored suit and the predictable cadence of corporate life claimed me. Cities blurred into a vibrant montage, Paris, Rome, Berlin, each pulsing with history, art, and intoxicating thrum of existence. Yet after weeks navigating teeming hostels and landmark-choked squares, a deeper hunger stirred, a craving for the unscripted, the untrodden, the authentic pulse beneath the tourist veneer. Prague offered them up, seated at a quiet cafe corner, Anton and Eliska, an older pair, etched with the geography of perhaps 60-odd years, their smiles radiating a deceptive warmth. Conversation flowed easily, meandering towards their secluded village nestled deep in the Bohemian countryside. Their words painted an idyll, timber-framed houses clustered against undulating hills, a rhythm of life untouched by the frantic tempo of modernity. "You must come," Eliska urged, a peculiar intensity flickering in her gaze. "Few outsiders find us. It would be a genuine immersion." The proposition resonated, a siren song promising the very essence I sought, far from the well-worn tourist circuits. When they offered transport, a shared journey in their aging sedan, hesitation felt like sacrilege. Hours bled away as the car devoured the miles, Prague's urban sprawl dissolving into rustic landscapes, then untamed forests and vast, sighing fields. Civilization thinned, then vanished. My phone screen displayed no service, barely an hour out, a detail I dismissed amidst the rising tide of adventurous anticipation. Anton and Eliska, meanwhile, spun tales of their ancestral home, narratives steeped in tradition, history, and an almost fervent devotion that only heightened my eagerness to witness it firsthand. Dusk was painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges when we finally rolled into the village. It materialized as if summoned from folklore, charming dwellings with steep, terracotta roofs, a diminutive square anchored by a church whose stones whispered of centuries, chickens and scratching nonchalantly in dusty yards, the air thick with the nostalgic perfume of burning wood. Anton and Eliska made introductions to villagers, lingering in the twilight. Smiles met me everywhere, seemingly open, welcoming. They ushered me towards the community's sole guest lodging, a structure so quaint, so utterly storybook, it felt conjured. That inaugural evening, I supped with my hosts at the village tavern. The fare was robust, elemental, washed down with ale that tasted of the earth itself. A palpable energy filled the room. Villagers drifted to our table, their curiosity piqued by the American interloper. Questions about my travels, about the distant shores of the United States, were posed with flattering interest. I felt less like a tourist, more like an emissary. Buoyed by the ale and the convivial spirit, I readily agreed to extend my stay, perhaps several days. Where else could I find such unvarnished reality? Dawn broke crisp and promising. I awoke, invigorated, eager to absorb the village's textures. The day passed in pleasant exploration. Conversations struck up with amiable locals, even a clumsy attempt at assisting with some light farm chore, Kindness seemed the local currency, freely offered. Yet beneath the surface pleasantries, dissonant notes began to sound, conversations that would cease mid-syllable upon my approach, glances swift and furtive exchanged between neighbors, and the smiles, ubiquitous, yet failing to ignite any genuine warmth in their eyes. A nascent unease coiled within me, which I diligently suppressed, attributing it to cultural unfamiliarity, the jitters of a solitary traveler far from home. These people had embraced me. Surely my suspicions were unfounded projections. Nightfall brought a celebration to the village square, melodies plucked on unfamiliar instruments, communal dancing, and more of that potent amber ale. I allowed the revelry to sweep me along, consciously pushing the tendrils of disquiet to the recesses of my mind. The illusion held until the moment I tried to excuse myself to signal my departure. Leaving, Anton queried, his affable mask firmly in place. "But your visit has barely begun. You must linger." I offered a polite demurral, citing schedules and onward plans. That's when I glimpsed it, a fleeting glint of something flinty and cold behind his pupils. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar, benevolent facade, yet it sent an icy tremor through me. "I insist," he murmured, his hand closing around my forearm with a pressure just shy of painful. "There is so much more you need to see." My gaze swept the square, suddenly perceiving the subtle shift in formation. The villagers had drawn closer, forming a loose, expectant circle. Their faces remained etched with smiles, but their eyes, dear God, their eyes, they held a collective focus, an unnerving, predatory intensity that turned my blood to slush. Mumbling an incoherent excuse, I retreated hastily to the guest house, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Something was profoundly amiss here. Escape was no longer a desire, but an imperative. Now. Morning's light brought no solace, only confirmation. The single track leading out of the village was obstructed. "Roadworks," a smiling man explained, regrettable but necessary. A day, perhaps two. And wasn't I finding my stay agreeable? Such haste seemed unusual. The subsequent days dissolved into a tightening spiral of dread. Each attempt to find an alternative route was subtly, politely, but firmly blocked. My phone remained a useless brick. Public phones, if they existed, were mysteriously out of order. The villagers were omnipresent, their movements fluid, their smiles unwavering, their gazes constant. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, feigning contentment while desperately seeking an unseen fissure in their control. But the awareness grew heavy. They saw through my pretense. The veneer of hospitality was wearing dangerously thin. The fifth night culminated. Another gathering, yet this one possessed a different, darker resonance. Villagers donned unsettling, crudely carved masks, their voices rising in a cyclical chant, the language guttural and alien. Watching from the shadowed window of my room, a chilling certainty gripped me. This strange rite might offer my final, fleeting chance. I waited, nerves stretched taut, until the ceremony reached its zenith, then slipped from the guest house's rear exit into the concealing darkness. I held only a rudimentary sense of direction towards the distant main road. The forest beckoned, a potential sanctuary. I'd barely reached the village perimeter when the shouts erupted. Discovered, raw instinct took over. I plunged into the black embrace of the woods, branches clawing at my face and clothes. Behind me, the pursuit began, not just a few, but dozens, their ritualistic chants twisting into something feral, something that scraped at the edges of human sound. I ran, lungs burning, legs protesting, yet the sounds of pursuit never faded, only drew nearer. Crashing through undergrowth, our eerie calls echoing between them in that incomprehensible tongue. Just as exhaustion threatened to pull me under, pinpricks of light pierced the dense woods ahead, a highway. I burst from the tree line, a ragged silhouette waving frantically at the approaching beams of a car. The vehicle screeched to a halt. I lunged towards the driver's side, practically clawing at the window. "Help me, please," I choked out, words torn by ragged breaths. "They're coming." The driver, an elderly man whose face registered shock at my disheveled state, fumbled with the lock. I tumbled inside scant seconds before the first masked figures spilled from the forest edge. As the car accelerated, fishtailing onto the tarmac, I risked a backward glance. They stood motionless at the roadside, a silent, watching congregation. Even across the distance, I saw the faint, reflected gleam in their eyes. What they intended, why my presence demanded such desperate retention, remains an unanswered horror. A part of me recoils from knowing. The authorities, predictably, treated my frantic narrative as delusion. The village, when they located it based on my fragmented directions, stood utterly deserted. No sign of Anton, Eliska, or the others. Only silent houses, weathered and empty, huddled around an ancient, indifferent church. Did it truly happen, or was it a psychic fracture, a breakdown catalyzed by isolation and the unfamiliar? The doubt lingers, a persistent shadow. But then sometimes, a face in a crowd, an older couple perhaps, with time-worn features and an easy smile, will momentarily snag my attention. And in their eyes, I'll see it again, that chilling vacancy, that hollow hunger. And I remember that the most inviting thresholds can conceal the deepest abysses, that malevolence often wears the mask of welcome, and that some secluded corners of the world are best left forever undisturbed. My passport gathers dust now. The vast world feels suddenly constricted, imbued with a latent darkness. Yet occasionally, in the deep quiet of the night, my fingers trace lines across maps of Eastern Europe, searching for a place that officially isn't there, tormented by the question of what awaited me had I tarried just one day more.